1 year later, it has been a real exciting ride. Getting to have my loved ones here by my side. Teenage me would love to find a reason to why, cause I'm shy now. This version of Joel wants to be your dog and guide. Another new season of Not Your Average Joel starts right now. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Not Your Average Joel. So, as y'all can see, I am back here in my room. I know recently I've been doing some in-person recordings, but this one I didn't have a choice but to do it in person. I mean, I couldn't do it in-person recording because this guest is all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in the UK, which he has been here before. So, I definitely would love to welcome back Jay Walker to this channel. It's definitely good to have him. And I think this topic is going to be a very interesting topic to talk about. So I'm glad that I have somebody that wants to be on here with me to discuss this major topic. So thank you for being
Yeah, no problem, man. We're either very brave or very stupid, one of them.
here. Yeah, well, I'm glad that I'm not alone talking about this because this is a topic that I feel like many people struggle with, and I think that it's important to address this topic. And for those that are wondering, today's topic is actually going to be on pornography. So if you saw on my little title thing that the topic is on pornography and you jumped in here thinking that we're going to be talking about the wonderful things that pornography offers, you came to the wrong video because we're going to talk more on the negative side of pornography and some of the other big things that pornography has infiltrated into today's culture because I know, and also how easy it is to access pornography with just the palm of our hands, like with the phones that we have. So I think that this is a good one to talk about. And if I'm going to be honest, this is definitely something that I have fallen into this trap before. I'm sure many people have fallen into this trap before. So I think that, we all might as well just talk about it. Like it's almost like the big elephant in the room. So let's just address the elephant in the room and break some barriers of making this not so uncomfortable to talk about and really just be open and honest with one another. So, I do have only two or three questions that I want to ask Jay Walker today. And of course, I'm going to be giving my input as well. So, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this first question. So, I know from what I've seen research online, I've seen that the porn industry has made probably over $1 billion and probably billions upon billions of dollars. And I guess my first question is, what are some of the most common reasons you feel like people start watching pornography?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put that disclaimer out there straight away as well and say something that I struggle with too. So yeah, I won't take the easy third person get out there in terms of people. Um, but I think like starting out, because I know the age was young and getting younger to now I'm hearing about addiction at like 13 and those kind of numbers. But for me, I think curiosity was kind of the main factor. It, I guess in the beginning, it's kind of in the same scope as girls and relationships in general. I think everybody kind of has that kind of childhood crossing over to adolescence curiosity, about sex and sexual relations and these things. And I guess pornography was kind of in that category. Like in terms of my first exposure to porn, there wasn't any kind of great will or desire there. Um, it was right around like it wasn't even like smartphones, but that kind of Bluetooth infrared kind of era. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where it's coming from. So that like that stuff was just getting passed around the playground, and somebody show you something, you'd be in a lesson or whatever, and somebody's be like and just like show you something. Um, so I think at the beginning stage, it was literally just a curiosity factor, and then potentially, if I dig deeper within that curiosity, maybe there's a kind of educational factor I was kind of leaning towards because at the beginning, like nobody knows what they're doing. You know what I mean? So I guess it kind of felt like in terms of preparation and such, for eventually having sex at the time. Like it felt like it maybe ticked a box from that angle as well. In terms of the beginning, I don't know if you want to jump in and say where it kind of your first introduction kind of came from.
Yeah, I think that, one thing that you mentioned that was really interesting is like the idea of it being just a curiosity kind of thing. Because I feel like for most people, it does seem like people get this exposure when they're probably in their preteen range, like probably somewhere in between 9 and maybe like 14 years old. And I could say that that's probably where have first gotten any kind of exposure to it. For one, I feel like because in middle school, like once you get into like the sixth through eighth grade year, you get this whole education on sex just because they know that people start going through puberty and they start are curious and wondering, how does that work? And they come to find out at a course that like, when people are younger, when kids are younger than probably 10, and they ask how babies are made, of course, a parent gives like a good old excuse that makes it seem very believable. And then by the time you get older, you realize that that that's not the truth, that there's more to it than just a stork or whatever they all want to say, these like different stories out there. So you start getting very curious and wondering where how it does it actually work. So I do think that that's a good answer, that curiosity is one. And I also want to say curiosity out of, sometimes I feel like it could be out of rebellion too. Like whenever you become a teenager, maybe your parents or whoever's watching, whoever's parents may say something like don't go try watching any of that stuff. It's nasty and it's dirty and stuff like that. And then the rebellious person within you is thinking, well, now I want to see it even more. I want to figure out why can't I watch this, or why shouldn't I watch this? So I almost want to tie that into the curiosity as well, because it makes you even more curious as a teenager on why can't I see this? So I think
Yeah.
that's really good. And then also the educational side of things, like how I've mentioned about in school, you start learning this stuff in maybe your science classes and stuff like that. So I think, people just have a curious thing, and not only do they want to learn it, but some people may want to see it. And unfortunately, the reality is that it starts at a really young age for many people.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like in that as well. So you kind of talked about the explanations and the stalk, where it kind of feels like in a category of things, at least to a child or a young person, where words don't really do it justice. Because like you kind of have this thing where, again, at the same preteen age, you know that sex is supposed to be something like awesome, and you also know kind of supposed to be for grown-ups. And like, you might get hit with that channel switch where you'll be watching TV or something, your parents, or then something will come out, be like, oh, switch. You're like, whoa, like, like what was about to happen there? And that question kind of stays. And then I remember a couple of times, like, just on TV, after I'd be watching TV, like basically innocently, you know how it is after a certain time, you're gonna get hit with a something or whatever else. And like, so I remember that being like a thing as well, where I'm kind of, because this is a bit where it gets sneaky, right? Because I think if we're not careful, we end up talking about pornography as solely this thing that you go seek and click on. But at times, I feel like I do feel and have felt like surrounded in the context of, you can just be watching TV and out of nowhere there'll be like a sex scene or something else like that, and you are now like watching pornography. Like it doesn't have to be a direct like web search or something like that for it to be pornography. I remember Vodi Bokum, like he once said in terms of pornography, he said, like, what do you mean when you say like viewing pornography? Because the world is pornographic. It's like, when we're walking around day to day, you're already on about like a 4 out of 10 in terms of the exposure to nudity and everything else. You could be watching like, you know what these adverts are like as well. Like it's rare to find a fully clothed like perfume ad or something like that. Links tend to go a bit crazy as well. Like, yeah, so you kind of bombarded, I feel like, with at least some form of pornography throughout your day. And then from that stage, it doesn't take much, and then something can easily, I think, kind of trigger, like it could make some kind of connection that kind of leads you down that rabbit hole. And after that, it just becomes a bit of a circular narrative, it feels like.
Yeah, you make a really good point there because nowadays you can just be watching just regular TV and just out of nowhere you see somebody like the back of somebody and like you could tell from the back they are have no clothes on. So like nowadays it's not just those adult films that you used to probably would have to rent and like go to an adult film section, but now it's just straight up in our faces on regular TV and is just basically open out there for anybody and everybody of all ages. And like you said, everything is very over sexualized. I feel like, in my opinion, nowadays, like I feel like whether, like you said, a commercial or even just the music that we listen to, every like lyric within a lot of these popular songs are very over sexualized. It's talking about different body parts and what I want to do to you and like all of this other stuff to where it's used in a very lustful, very kind of way, and it's being thrown into this world to where it's almost becoming part of culture, and we're very desensitized whenever we probably do actually see real pornography because we almost feel like we've already dipped our toe into pornography by already seeing some of these things that we just see on regular TV or the music that we listen to or anything like that. So I could definitely agree with that. These TV shows can almost really be pornography in a way. It's just maybe
Yeah,
not the
I wouldn't even say
pornography that,
almost. I wouldn't even say
yeah,
almost.
yeah, just take out the almost. Yeah, it is pornography. So yeah, if we're gonna be real about it, yeah, we might as well just go all out with it. So it
Yeah,
is for sure.
because I guess sometimes for me, like I got kids now, right? So sometimes for me, the barometer in my own mind, because like you say, things are so normalized, the barometer in my own mind is, oh shoot, kid just walked in, like channel switch, like like that lets me know that something's wrong, and this is from top to bottom. So like I feel like in the mainstream, like Game of Thrones, like it's pornographic, like Power, pornographic, like these things are like pornographic material. As you were talking, it made me kind of consider whether audio could be, and like in terms of ticking the boxes, I feel like it definitely can, in terms of like the content, like it's so highly sexualized that I think I'd have to place it as pornographic, like where it's literally like I'm trying not to give shout outs, but I'm also trying to be like specific. But like WAP, for example, if you've heard this, like that, if that's not porn, like is it the description and the details that goes into in terms of describing certain acts, like that is pornographic. And then in the context of if someone has an actual addiction, I can easily see how that could make them jump on the smartphone or make them click, or like like I feel like oftentimes like the I'll see certain influencers or certain like musical artists and such, in terms of their following, quite often it's not necessarily for what they're overtly selling, aka the music. I feel like a lot of Cardi B fans, for example, it's not the music why they mess with her, it's the imagery and the body and the everything else.
Very true. I think that nowadays it is almost not about your talent as far as your singing or your rapping or even your acting skills anymore. It almost does sometimes get based off your looks, and sometimes looks do sell. I've heard that term that like sex sells, and it is very true that it does in a way sell even with people that may not label themselves as a adult film star. They may be a rapper, like you said, someone like Cardi B that wears some very revealing stuff. And even I've seen a couple of her music videos to where it's got some very, very graphic stuff that I feel like definitely kids don't need to be seeing. But I am afraid that now that I know you talked about how, when a kid walks into the room, like people automatically change the channel and like to something completely different. But I wonder when, like, if as we become desensitized by these regular things that we see on TV, when will it ever be to a point to where even kids are going to just want to it's just going to be normal for kids to run into these kind of things because like even I don't know if you've watched any of like the Marvel movies like Spider-Man and all of that, but I know like the new like some of the newer stuff that I've been watching, like whether it's the Thor movie or even Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they have a lot of sexual references in there, and even on Thor, the newest Thor, like you see his rear end in the movie, like you see his bottom in the movie. So, and my nephews and nieces were watching this movie with us, so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like they're basically showing nudity in Marvel movies and talking a lot about sexual references in Marvel movies to where I feel like it used to be like more of a family friendly based kind of thing that you used to could watch, but now I feel like Marvel movies are even questionable as far as how far are they going to go into this as making things whether it's a sexual joke or just over sexualizing many different things just within a movie where it's like based off comic books. So that even to me, I just wonder when is it going to go too far? Like with even exposing this to children, and then children are just going to be eventually because like we mentioned, maybe in between 9 and 14, maybe somebody was first exposed to it. Well, what about the ones that are younger? Like, is it going to eventually be to where kids that are 3 years old are just going to see this stuff and not even be sensitized by it? Are they just going to just be exposed to it and it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it is like normalized. But I do feel like a lot of the things I'm maybe trying to shield them from, or you might be trying to like shield them from, like, I think it is like so normalized already because it's not like they're seeing it and being like, whoa, like, like when you see these kids in those scenes, they're like, it's not even like a thing like that. It's more of a ha ha he type thing than it is like any real like shock value. Like, there's a point when I'm trying not to say buzzwords that's going to get the vid demonetized as well. But there's
Mhm,
a period of time where a man showing his rear end to an audience of children, that there would be particular words for that type of thing. Do you know what I mean? That wouldn't be
mhm.
anywhere close to normal. And to extend it a bit further, just in terms of like, how are people watching pornography and these things, I feel like Instagram, uh, TikTok, not so much Facebook, uh, probably, but like I don't think it's so much of a thing there. But I feel like a lot of that is on that same pornography scale as well. You stay on there for long enough, you will see on the explore page or wherever else, like certain things like crossing paths and that kind of thing, or certain people directly targeting you on those platforms and that kind of thing. So in terms of the access, I feel like that there's a soft form of it that is just perpetually around us. It's almost like to say, when are we not exposed to pornography might be a shorter conversation than when are we?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. It does, when you really do think about when are you not exposed to it, like you said, it could just be a 2 minute conversation. We just end it from there because it is true that almost every case that you could think of, like there's different ways that kids are even being exposed to this. And even for people that didn't get exposed to it as a preteen, that maybe got exposed to pornography as an adult, or maybe got introduced to it by someone else as an adult, maybe their spouse, for example. Let's say maybe their spouse got them into watching pornography. And I was just thinking like maybe another reason why maybe people watch porn is because maybe people think this is a way to spice up their marriage and to not have a just a plain regular boring typical average marriage, that maybe people are thinking you watching these kind of porn scenes and where there's different things happening, whether it's things like role play or whatever, stuff like that gets involved in. People are thinking this is a way to incorporate this into my marriage and spice things up. Or even if you're not married and you just kind of get introduced to pornography by a friend or so, and maybe you're single and you're lonely and you feel for some reason that watching pornography will make you feel less lonely. Like there's so many different reasons that you could really go about, figuring out why somebody would watch pornography. And then I think that nowadays it's just so easy to access, like we mentioned, just with our phones in general. You can just open it up and search it on Google, and you're right at it. So everyone has a different perspective and reasoning on why they watch it. And then also one more thing that I wanted to mention as far as a reason why maybe people are wanting to watch it is I feel like there are probably people that are watching it maybe don't have the most self-confidence in the way they look. And maybe them watching this adult film star do their thing on the pornography like video. Maybe they wish that they looked like that person in a way. So I feel like there's just so many different perspectives that you can look into this, really.
Yeah, I think for me it was trying to evaluate myself. I think it was a stress factor that was kind of the tipping point. Um, because I think the time period when I realized it was a problem is when I felt like I was watching it against my will. Like because of Christian convictions, I didn't want to watch it. But then I feel like at certain times my stress level would be on a certain point, and then that quick porn experience felt like it was a kind of rebalancing, which overall doesn't work for anything. But in that moment, there's a weird kind of override where it feels like that's what's going to help. And I think it's something I've only recently kind of looked into more. But the kind of distinction between pleasure and, to be specific, sexual pleasure and happiness, in terms of viewing those things, is like two so totally different things. Because I think a lot of times, and when we're chasing the flesh, to put it in like a person to person form, or when we're chasing a particular type of pleasure, I think the lie we can kind of tell ourselves is that's what's going to make us happy. That's what we need right now. That's what we need to prescribe and self medicate almost ourselves with. But again, like to go at it from like a biblical perspective, like like sin is never satisfied. If porn was as awesome as the world would maybe have us believe, like watching it once would be sufficient. You wouldn't need to do it again. You'd be completely fulfilled. But if this is turned into something where you're having to habitually do it, like it can't be that great and it can't be that fulfilling if it only lasts you know, so in terms of such a temporary context. That's when it starts crossing over to this kind of drug addict kind of physical chemical imbalance type of situation where you feel like you're having to almost medicate yourself with it in the same way that a drug addict or something would.
Yeah, yeah, that is very, very true that it can easily become something that people can get addicted to if they think that this is the only way that they can have a sexual pleasing moment after a stressful day or whatever the case may be. People think that this is probably the answer to their question. And usually, like you said, if it truly was the answer to your question, then that one time you would think would suffice. Like that would be enough. But too often, too many people fall into this trap in this mindset that you have to do this basically on a daily and if you, like I said, if it becomes a habitual thing, then it can easily become addiction to where it completely consumes your life. Which my next question actually was about many of the negative side effects that can come with pornography, because I know, like you said, the world views pornography in such a positive way and think that let's be sex positive, let's talk about this and be so open about what we love about sex and what are the wonderful things about it. So, I think talking about the negative side of things from a Christian and a biblical standpoint is truly important as well, because we don't want anybody thinking the idea that even though Christians do struggle with this as well, many Christians do, but at the same time, we know that there is that level of conviction if we are Christians, and that we know that we want to do better and improve in different areas. And if we just keep falling into the same trap, then it can lead to an addiction for sure. And that's something that can be really hard to get out of. You know, it's just as bad as substance abuse, I would say for sure, even though you're not drinking or using drugs, but like your mind is still being messed with in a way, and it deals with a lot of your psyche and your mind altogether, mental health for sure.
Yeah, and I do also feel like again keeping the negative effects thing, I do feel like what makes additionally harmful is just because of the way that we're wired, we struggle to get the same pleasure from the same thing repeatedly. So like, often with like porn consumption, if you watched a video or whatever, it's rare that somebody may watch, the same two, three videos and that's their porn consumption throughout their lifetime. It tends to be something that wants more and more and more and more, and that desensitization seems to get greater and greater until eventually it can be that the things that you used to bring you pleasure in that context no longer bring you pleasure anymore. So like your whole psyche starts to shift in terms of you're starting to be more and more adventurous, more and more out there. You're starting to like have these weird rabbit hole things that you never actually as a functional regular human being like even think about. They're now a part of your psyche and a part of your memories and a part of your kind of habits that can start to form. And I think that's the thing that scared me the most. Um, I don't even think it was from a Christian perspective. I think it was that desensitization, like what is on the other side of that. And then you start hearing about things like erectile dysfunction. You're like, Lord have mercy. Like, let it not be me. Because this is the thing with the whole, like, I'd say sex has been taken and perverted into being something else. And biblically, especially as a young person, I, I'm trying to think if it was, yeah, there was two things. Like one was sex outside of marriage, and the second thing was pornography, where like I felt like so this is talking about age like 16 or so. I felt like I needed like a nice solid verse or chapter or something that said, "Thou shalt not watch pornography and have sex outside of marriage." And I feel like at that age, I never really got that. It's like the one thing that I kind of stayed after the service to talk to the pastor about, like, hey, so and if I'm being honest, like I never felt like I got a sufficient answer. And I feel like I don't know, maybe he was unprepared in that sense too. Because he was like, "What do you mean?" But so, it was such a straightforward question that I think it came across defensive, if you know what I mean. So the question was like, where in the Bible does it say sex outside of marriage is wrong? And it's like, so what do you mean? That was already a kind of feel like, whoa, okay, about to get shunned. And then and then like the follow-up was like, when I said the same question, yeah, it was like the whole Bible says that. I was like, like, but I think fundamentally, maybe, perhaps, possibly, what he was trying to say was in the context of like lust and potentially adultery as well, in terms of, because Jesus introduces this concept of our thoughts being sinful, right? Like, sin in your heart, sin in your mind. Um, and if we hold that as a self-evident truth, then we start to have major problems based on the images that we see when we close our eyes, one or two, when we're like watching our screens and things like that, in terms of what we are lusting over. Because chances are it's not your wife or husband, it's somebody else's either current wife or husband, because some of these people are married, like somehow, right?
Hmm.
um, or fundamentally somebody's future wife or future husband, and it is still somebody's son, daughter, whatever else that these crazy, things are happening to. And there's a lot like when I've like watched little docu series and such, looking behind the scenes, that people in there with like fundamental physical issues now due to that as a chosen career. There's people who were claimed to have been like trafficked or claimed to have been exploited or claimed to have been abused during that experience. Because like, as an industry, and like you said about the billions involved, like the treatment of these people was another factor. So like those were the kind of major negatives that kind of I tried to keep like there on my forehead, just on the inside, to kind of deter me from partaking.
Yeah, and to add on to your talk, you were talking about lust and how some people could tend to lust, maybe not about their spouse, but maybe about somebody else's spouse. And I think that is very common that many people can do that as a married couple and start imagining themselves being with someone, which we know, like in the Bible, it does talk about stuff like if you lust with someone even in your head, you're basically doing it. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that's basically what it's saying that if you're even thinking sexually about somebody, then you might as well have been just physically doing it with them. And it is very true that if you add that into the equation, that, pornography does embrace basically our fleshly desires of lust. And that's definitely something that we know, of course, is not the way that God had intended sex. Like I think you mentioned about how, like just with this idea of lust, I feel like that's what this whole pornography thing is about. Is just there's no true love there. You can see that it's just basically to people that are just getting paid and to do what they're supposed to do and to entertain and to have everyone out here thinking that this is how you should be loving your spouse or somebody that you're with. And it's a unrealistic like expectation basically that they're given to people thinking that this is the way that you should be doing, and if you're not doing it this way, then what's wrong with you? And it does take the whole love out of the equation, because that's what God intended it for, which is between husband and wife, and to have that true love there. And that's where sex can be beautiful in that way. But nowadays we have perverted sex to where it's so different compared to what the word of God says, and it makes it very not perverted, nasty, ugly, and it just it's unfortunate that it's being done this way, but it is something that is a fleshly desire that many people struggle with, and we all have fallen into the trap one way or another. I'm sure most people that are watching can say they have probably struggled with this. So I definitely think, yeah, just the whole embracing our lustful side of things, which is one of the seven deadly sins. But it is, we're basically embracing our deadly sins and just allowing it to happen instead of having any moment of conviction, because we're so desensitized by already these things like we mentioned earlier that we see on our screens just within regular television or TikTok or even Instagram, that we are almost just, okay, this doesn't bother me. Like I've already seen this, just now it's longer and it's more content within pornography than of course it is within a regular show where you may just see it for maybe 30 seconds, but still you get so desensitized that it really doesn't bother as many people anymore. And conviction is, it's still definitely, I'm glad that people have moments of conviction, but I'm sure less and less people are convicted of this just because of how desensitized we are.
Yeah, and I feel like it's one of the reasons why marriage has taken such a beating as well, in terms of like the brand of it. Like sex was never created to be something that's marketed and sold as a product for ads. That was never the context in which it was created. And it was created to be a physical manifestation of the union between husband and wife, where they become one flesh. And through becoming one flesh, you then somehow have another flesh, reproduction, and these things. Not to say that it's solely made for reproduction, but it is solely made as a physical manifestation of becoming one flesh and enjoying your one body with your spouse as two become one. Like that is my understanding of the dichotomy in which this thing exists. Like if we actually pause to reflect on exactly what's happening, it's so crazy. Like imagine, like take away the screen for just a second, because one way or another it is still real life we're talking about. Take away the screen now. Like can you imagine like a person doing that, like just openly? The only like protection is the fact that that nobody's watching you watching that madness take place. But I think that we spoke at the beginning about the fact that 99% of men I've watched pornography is just that I'd seen. I can't imagine 99% of men that would like physically like masturbate in front of like a couple having sex there. Like I don't think most people would do that because they know they're being seen. So there's something within us that knows like it's crazy to get off to somebody else having sex, like And
Mhm.
I'd go one step further and say we probably scold somebody in society who did that kind of thing. If there was somebody outside your bedroom window while you and your spouse or what were having sex and you saw the mess, you'd be like, "Whoa, what kind of a crazy psychotic creep, stalker, insert other derogatory names here person was that?" But
Mhm.
that's like literally the position we have to find ourselves in.
Yeah, yeah, that is very accurate. I would say for sure that we would probably look at somebody that is masturbating as like, whoa, what are you doing that? Even though we may be personally going through the same thing, but we just don't do it in public. So yeah, it does, show that you could do the same thing, but just the setting could be different. So really feels like you said, if you take the screens down and you really look at the big picture of it all, it definitely is true. You make a really good point with that. And I know you mentioned about relationships take a beating when it comes to pornography sometimes. And it is very true that I felt like marriages can end over pornography. Maybe somebody has such a addiction that they're just so obsessed with this idea of pornography or maybe lusting over someone else that it is in a way maybe not emotional. I mean, it is adultery in a way when you think about you lusting over somebody else's significant other or just lusting over the person that is on your screen that you're watching. So I think that it can ruin many marriages and it can ruin even relationships with people within your family and your friends that may even they may struggle with it, but they hearing someone else struggle with it. Of course, they want to maybe throw stones, even though they have maybe that same struggle. But whenever somebody is exposed, it's like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't expect Christian people, someone that's Christian to struggle with this, even though I do too. But since yours is out in the public, we're just gonna, throw you out there as a sacrificial lamb, basically. So I think that it ruins many relationships, even with, your church communities. So definitely relationships can be harmed there for sure. I think that that's unfortunate, but it is reality.
Yeah. And I feel like quite often private sins can be some of the worst ones just because we don't feel like we're ever challenged to deal with them. Like if somebody has like an anger problem where they just get angry, every so often you're gonna find yourself in a situation where like, oh man, like yeah, you guys are right. I shouldn't have spoke like that. I shouldn't have acted like that. I need to change. I'm gonna do better, type thing. But the sins we're able to kind of do in the privacy of our own homes, like these can be some of the most stubborn, just because we're not confronted with them in a way that kind of challenges us or forces us to change, just because we kind of feel like they're being done in the dark, and then that becomes even more compounded when I'd say they're endorsed, because I feel like internally there's definitely a shame. And I feel like for most people, I'm trying to think, it's only been one or two where when I've had like an actual deep conversation, where they've been like, no, I don't feel bad when I watch pornography, but I still feel like by and large, most people, even those who enjoy watching it, they'll still say, yeah, like, I don't know why, but I kind of feel bad. Like afterwards, you feel a bit guilty or ashamed. So I do feel like for the most part, we're hardwired with knowing within our own self and convictions that there's something wrong here. But I feel like it's often crossed over to something that's become involuntary. I think something that was useful to me just in terms of understanding the human experience was free will versus free agency. And just in case people haven't heard the term before, so free will is when there's no pushes and pulls on your morality and your choices. You're literally free to be able to make those decisions. Whereas free agency is, Christians believe that within the human experience, because we're laden with sin and we have a sin nature, that we're often pushed towards sin. So when being pushed towards sin, you have to actively pull yourself away from it certain times. Otherwise, you'll end up succumbing to it. And this is one of those kind of categories where, because of the wants and the loss of the flesh, we are going to be pushed towards certain things, certain people. And I feel like biblically, sex is a thing, like it wreaks havoc like throughout the Bible, you know, from your King David's, Solomon's, like it's just it's problematic like throughout the text, and I feel like this is just another modern Lego block on top of that thing where many people's character has been tested, and we often fall due to that specific sin.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you explained the difference between free will and free agency because I'm sure many people aren't aware of what the differences are. You know, people probably think it's the same when in reality it's not the same. So I'm glad that you did explain that because it is true that when you really look into both phrases or that you see the difference between it. And one thing that you did mention at the beginning is that you mentioned that when we keep this a private thing that we're not being challenged to do better and that we're just basically thinking that okay, I'm just going to keep doing it. If I'm not going to get caught, you know, it's fine. Like if I don't get caught, then I'm pretty good at hiding this. And many people may not want to go through those moments of being held accountable. And that actually, in a way, leads to my last question as far as maybe advice that maybe we can give to someone that has a porn addiction that maybe has convictions about this, but is scared to admit it. I think one thing for sure is like maybe having an accountability partner would be really good. Just one person that I feel like you can really, really trust opening up with this too. It doesn't even have to be a family member. It could just be a really close friend that you have, or of course it could be your spouse, or it could be a family member if you really feel very inclined and like open to want to be honest with somebody. So I think having an accountability partner, I think is really good because not only like we know at the end of the day, like God sees everything. And you know, I know people nowadays when they hear that, they think about it in like the most negative way and like even try to sexualize that too, which is pretty like ridiculous in my opinion. But at the end of the day, God does know what what we're going to fall into, what traps we're going to fall into, and what we're going to watch and all of that. So I think you know we think just because we can't physically hear God's voice doesn't mean, you know, it just means basically that I can just keep doing whatever I want. But I think when you add an accountability partner into the equation, I feel like you have more of a challenge that, okay, now somebody knows about my struggles. Let me try to do better and improve in this area instead of thinking, let me just keep doing this and not even tell my accountability partner because eventually your accountability partner is going to ask, how have you been doing in this area? And what progress have you made? Have you gone a week without watching it? Have you gone 3 days without watching it? So eventually it'll come back up. So I think just if you are really wanting to make change out of this, get an accountability partner.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like solid advice. And that goes for everything, man. Accountability just it just helps. Like I think one of the things that like I kind of struggled with because I've like started and stopped so many times um in terms of gaps, but like I think it can be quite daunting to say to someone, never watch porn again. Um and it can be quite daunting to say to yourself, I will never ever watch porn again so long as I live. So like, like forever is quite daunting, And I'd say for me, this kind of crosses over into even um my view on monogamy, where trying to think what age I got married, but the early 20s. And like the idea of like one partner, like forever, forever, ever, forever. Like and like it's so daunting to think about forever. Yeah, but forever is just made up of just days, like ultimately and hours and minutes. So I'd say wherever you are, in terms of your journey. If this is something that's happening twice a day, if this is something that's happening twice a week or whatever, I'd say like start by just focusing on like getting some of that control back, and regaining that self-control one bit at a time, you know? So you might not be able to go 365 days, but like you're kind of leaning towards it. Can you go one? Okay. If you keep going one, then that's the same as forever, you know? You can always just go one day. And then if or when you fail, like I'd say like fail under grace, meaning just because you failed once, it doesn't mean that you should stop trying, you know? Even if you need to put this thing on the scoreboard, right? Like, you know, if you did 6 days and then one day you flopped, that's at least 6-1 that you can say, you know? Like one failure doesn't define a person, define a journey. Because I think when I was younger as well, I'd say I kind of felt like there were certain things you could just beat and be done with. Um, but I think speaking to others and speaking to people who have had like real addictions, like, you know, because I asked perhaps naive questions at that point in life. I'd be like, oh, so how did you stop being a drug addict? Like, that's amazing. Like, look at what God's done in your life. And then like, no, I haven't stopped being a drug addict. I'm just a drug addict that doesn't take drugs. Like, you know, so it's still there, and you may well find that that thing is still there, especially because of what we said at the top of the show. Like you're constantly going to be hit and surrounded by these things. So just because the urge is still there, it doesn't mean that you're not doing well to fight it, you know? Keep fighting a good fight, battle every day. And yeah, I'd say just failing on the grace would be my way of summarizing that factor.
Yeah, yeah, you are right that giving ourselves basically a high, like putting the bar so high that, some people may just say flat out, never watch porn again, never do this or whatever addiction that somebody may be struggling with. It can be very daunting to think of and think that like, oh man, I'm never going to reach that. So then you fall into even more pressure within your mind and psyche, and it becomes a mind game to where it's even more stressful, and you almost wish that you never told anybody because then you almost have this level of expectation that is unrealistic sometimes, that everybody's going to fall back into watching something. Maybe if it, like you said, even if you went a week without it, then you just fell back into it. I think looking into it the way that you said, like almost a scoreboard kind of mindset where, okay, well, you went 7 days without it. You just fell into temptation or whatever you want to call it one time. And that's a win, when you think about it in like sports terms, like when you think of whoever has more points, other than golf, but whoever has more points, you win the game.
Yeah,
So, I think that it's important to look at it that way because giving somebody, like even when I've seen like people that have been on drugs, they don't quit cold turkey because there comes the whole like withdrawals that comes with that. So even in this sense of pornography, even though it's not substance abuse, but it is a mind a mind-boggling thing that you have to get control back on that. So like I think starting off slow is definitely a really good way in as far as overcoming being a porn addict that eventually will not be watching porn. It just maybe will take time. So it requires a lot of patience and a lot of grace. And like whenever you do fall, don't beat yourself up too much because we all, at the end of the day, are sinners. None of us are ever going to be perfect here on earth. So I think starting off slow, just tell yourself, go 3 days without watching anything and see where to go from there. And if you made it to 3 days, and you may say, okay, I'm going to go another 5 days. Like, you just, the limit is endless, but, eventually it's going to get to where, yeah, it's endless. But at first, just start with the easy stuff like, well, I mean, or even if it's hard to go 3 days without, try to go 24 hours without. Just there's not a set standard on how to do this. Everyone has a different journey, and I think that whether this is an addiction that people have had for 10 minutes or for 10 years, I think it's important to point out that no matter how old or young you are with the struggle, that it's never too late to get out of this, and that it's never too late to start over and to try to improve in this area. So I think that there are many resources out there. There's many different websites that have maybe courses that you want to look into, and or even like I said, an accountability partner, or just even just being, I don't know, just being honest with, or even if you just want to leave it between you and the Lord, if you want to journal about it. I mean, just there's so many different ways that you can go about it, but just know that it's not impossible to get out of it, even though I know sometimes it can seem like it has consumed your life and it's taken over your life in such a negative way, but you could always turn a negative into a positive.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say to the way that the world is right now, and it's one of those low Noah's Ark type bars, but the fact that you're thinking about quitting, like that's doing something in itself compared to what's going on outside. Like the Bible says that we're dead in our transgressions before Christ called us, you know? Like a dead person doesn't fight against anything. So the fact that you're able to have even a mindset that says, I'm going to stop watching porn, like that's a win in itself, just to even be in that place and that space, because it's not a normal place and space to be in. It's not the direction that the world is going. Like, I feel like generally we've been on a scale for a while where generationally it just seems to get more and more extreme. Like, and I say that because we're at like 50s and 60s, you could flash an ankle and you'd be like, oh, like, and like right now, there's not really much left, but I think every generation thinks like that. So I'm like, wherever this thing is going next, like it's just going to be more and more problematic. So the quicker you can start kind of getting a grasp on where you are when you're at, because as far as I'm concerned, like this thing should be illegal. Like
Mhm.
especially when we weigh up the access again, because we're talking about like 12 and 13-year-old children, right? And from where we are and where you are, the age of consent and everything else, we know. So the fact that these children are being exposed to this thing and we know the harmful effects that it can have. Like that is crazy. And that's literally, as far as I can see it, is literally just a government tax reason why this thing isn't banned. Like if you ask most people, like I'm sure they'd be able to find more negatives than positives here. So the positive is a moment of sexual gratification. Like there's not much more positives than that. And this is not something that is, in this bottle of pornography that we can't get from anywhere else in life. Like, we're all able, I like to think, to aspire towards a healthy sex life. And pornography is never going to be a substitute for that makes you happy. It can bring you momentary pleasure, which is why people do it and why it's $1 billion industry. Pleasure, yes. Momentarily, yes. Happiness, hell no.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that, to the front as we are closing out on this topic, because I think it's really important to mention, how times are changing. Like you said, back in maybe our parents' days, for them it may have been like you said, your ankles are showing, or you almost have some of you're showing your shoulders, and it's like, oh my gosh, like so like they're really going for it. But it's like nowadays when you look about it, fast forward, let's just say 40, 50 years later, and you see how it has gotten so much crazier and so much more revealing nowadays. And to on top of it, with the technology that we have nowadays, with back then they just starting with like TVs and telephones, and all, but now we have these cell phones that you can have in the palm of your hand, and that as each generation goes, I feel like the kids that are even younger are able to get phones. Like for me, I didn't even get a phone until I was probably 17. But now, like this next generation of kids, like some of my nephews and nieces, some of them have phones at like 8 years old. So it's like that's like an opportunity for kids to just stumble upon something, even if they're not intentionally looking into just actual pornography, but they may just be looking into, like we mentioned, TikTok or Instagram, and you see some of these different videos. And sometimes I have seen where there have been kids that I personally know that are watching stuff or listening to stuff that has very much adult content in it, whether it's even if it's just language or just like some of the language is referring to sexual terms. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like of course they don't know what it means, but like but they're listening to it and it's
and
like
singing along.
yeah, and they're singing along, not knowing and realizing what it means. So it's like,
I hope
we're
they're not realizing.
yeah, exactly. Same here. I hope that they don't realize until you tell them, like, hey, that's what it means. You probably probably not want to say that. But it is true though. We are going towards some crazy times and it's not going up from here. It's probably getting worse from here. So I think getting into this head on and, really trying to pursue on getting out of this addiction that maybe somebody may have, or just even if it's not an addiction for people yet, it may just be a bad habit that they started, which can definitely lead into addiction. I think there's always ways to realize that this really should be illegal. Like you said, it shouldn't be out there for children to see, but at the end of the day, I know reality is it is out there, but all we can do is just try to do our best to use our eyes and even our ears, with the sound of stuff that happens in pornography. Use our eyes and ears to give glory to God at the end of the day, even if it's not in pornography, just even with the music we listen to, the TV shows we watch. So that's all we can do is just try our best to give God the glory.
Yeah, honestly, like I know you're winding down. I'm trying not to extend, but like what is the difference between like prostitution and pornography, where one is illegal and one is illegal?
Mm. That's a really good question. I really wondered that myself because they both basically are doing the same exact thing. They're giving the same sexual message out there. But then, yeah, at the same time, one is legal and one's not. So it's like, how does that, like the math ain't mathing. It's not adding up and it's not making any sense as to why, how can one thing be okay and then the other one we look at, society looks at it and it's like a negative light, but the other way we're thinking, okay, this is okay, but it's like, how? Like it's the same thing basically.
Yeah, they're both sex workers, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is just bizarre to think of for real when you think about it. So this is something that I hope that, I hope somebody really, listens to this or, if you're watching this on YouTube, I hope that you're really getting something out of this because I'm definitely just talking to someone else about this. I think it's really neat. I mean, in a way to talk about it. I mean, I hate that this is a topic that we have to address, but it is a real topic that many people struggle with and go through. And I think that it's really helpful when I'm not just sitting here by myself talking about this, but hearing it from even someone way across the Atlantic Ocean that can, knows about the struggles of this or maybe knows someone that goes through the same struggles. Like, I think that's just really neat in a way when we can talk about something, just talk about ways that we can overcome something like this. So I just really hope that everyone got something out of this. And I definitely appreciate you being on here for sure. I know it's really late over there.
No, that's so good, man. My pleasure as usual.
Yes, absolutely. So everyone, I hope that y'all enjoyed this and whether you're watching or listening to this, be sure to give it a thumbs up or be sure to comment or even if you want to send me a private message, maybe if you're struggling with this as well, you're free to message me whether it's at my Instagram account at Not Your Average Joel Podcast. You can message me there privately. Or if you have enough courage to post about it publicly, I mean, you can always post it on YouTube. So there's different ways that you can express maybe your struggles and maybe want to look to someone for guidance or maybe you want me as your accountability partner. Maybe you want Jay Walker as your accountability partner. So I think that, there's always room for growth in this area and there's room for no judgment in a way because we all have struggled with this too. So, just being open is sometimes the scariest part is the first step. But I think just once you open up about it, then it gets a little bit easier from there, even though there's still challenges. So, anyways, everybody, I appreciate y'all watching, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of your day or night, depending on when you are watching or listening to this. And I will see y'all on the next episode of Not Your Average Joel. I'll talk to y'all
Yeah.
later.
Take care, you guys.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Not Your Average Joe. You should know the drill by now, but just in case if you don't, my podcast is available not only on YouTube, but also on most podcast streaming platforms, my Instagram page at Not Your Average Joel Podcast, and I also have a website that you can visit at notyouraveragejowelpodcast.com. My episodes will be coming out every Wednesdays going forward, so be sure to come back next Wednesday for a new episode. Thank you once again for your support, and I will talk to y'all in the next episode of Not Your Average Joe. Goodbye.